Thanks. I'm also a little bit banged up after that. Sorry about that. Anyway, I've run into this case a lot where you're working on one test, you run it, and it's fine, and then you run the same thing in your test suite, and for whatever reason, it's not fine. Like, taking longer than I had hoped. There it is. And this is the same test, but it runs fine on its own, and you don't know why. There's probably some leaky test. It's not doing its teardown properly. It's leaving over some state, and it's mucking up tests downstream. So I was using a script for a while that did an operation inspired by git bisect to go and bisect the files of your test suite and keep cutting it down until it found the one test with the leaky teardown. And I decided, at the encouragement of some coworkers, to turn this into a rake task, and then you can run this rake task, and this will take a minute. I'll blather while it's going on. It cuts it in half, sees if that makes it fail, cuts it in the other half, keeps narrowing it down until it finds the one test that it fails with. There, it's failing. While this is going on, I'm the guy who broke the 1.9 production deploy at New Relic. I'm also the guy who fixed it, so at least I cleaned up my mess. This is not a Rails app. That's how it's so fast. This is the Ruby agent. I work on that at New Relic. So. Well, it was the agent. It was the agent which broke the deploy, so I had to go and fix that real quick. So here it is. It narrowed it down. There's this one test, this one, New Relic agent test, which is breaking that other like version number test that we were trying to do. And if we look, I cheated for purposes of this test. This is the one that we want not to fail. So fail if fail, and then upstream there's this version test that just says fail to true. So, but the moral of the story is that this will show up if you don't do your teardowns properly or your setups properly, depending on which side you want to cut it on. And hopefully this'll you can use this. And my mouse is not going to work. Thanks. Also my text resizing. Anyway. It's a gem. It's on GitHub. You can use it. It's very new, so tell me if it doesn't work. Thanks. Next.
Okay, I'm Rob Head, and I worked for Pivotal Labs for 2 years, and now we're starting a new lab here in Oregon called Zeal. That's who I am. Anyway, I'm from Ashland, and that means I'm going to talk about the deeper enlightenment of Agile and how it applies to mysticism. So this talk is called Ruby and Roomy, or Why Agile Works. Okay, so sit, be still, and listen, because you were drunk, and we're at the edge of the roof. For real, that's a real quote. Okay, this is my first Rails project. Woo, 2006, look at that design work. All right. So this woman teaches people how to not be terrible people for a living. And she has a business called Virtues Training, inspiring, empowering, and transforming people to achieve their potential. Okay, that's cool. So it got me to thinking about these issues, virtues, right? Things like courage or patience, respect, service, humility, these sorts of things, right? And I got to thinking, maybe philosophy and mysticism and even religion, maybe it's not about invisible friends and feeling superior. Maybe it's really about maybe trying to develop my character and that sort of thing. And so there's this guy that was a mystic poet in the 13th century. He was Afghani and Persian. His name was Rumi. Anybody read any Rumi? Woo, all right. Okay, so he was a mystical poet, and he had the sweetest headgear that I've ever seen. It's really amazing. So this is what he said about courage, which is one of the virtues that I was reflecting on. He said, start a huge, foolish project like Noah. It makes absolutely no difference what people think of you. Cool. I like that. I have a tendency to do stupid things that people think are ridiculous. So I got to thinking about, who else has done these things. So speaking of foolish projects, Matz, decided there weren't enough programming languages in the world, so he created Ruby. But he didn't do it just for the sake of doing it. He did it because he had this virtue in mind. He said, for me, the purpose of life is partly to have joy. Programmers can also often feel joy when they can concentrate on the creative side of programming. So Ruby is designed to make programmers happy. Matz. Love this guy. I really, truly love this guy. I actually met him for the first time last week and got to sort of smile at him and sort of, bow a little bit. He was getting swag from Sarah. Is Sarah in here? And he was, he just got his Pivotal shirt and hat from the swag closet, and he was super happy about that, which I thought was really amusing. Anyway, other foolish projects, ridiculous, right? I mean, some punk kid is gonna beat like .NET, built by the the most powerful company in the world, but he did. So it got me thinking. It's just not the first time that we've started thinking about what are the virtues that make coding work. So Larry Wall, right, had this amusing talk where he talked about laziness, impatience, and hubris, but that's not really what we're talking about here. Let's talk Agile. So Agile is about these larger and larger iterations, these larger and larger sort of cycles of action and reflection, right? It happens on a minute level, on the daily level, on the iteration level, that sort of thing. And it has to do with all of these, I'm getting a phone call, wow. Okay, so it has to do with all these virtues that are required. So I learned this from Rob Mee. Anybody taken the RPI, which is the Rob's programming interview? Okay, so it turns out there's this methodology he uses. In 45 minutes, he knows whether he wants to hire you or not. But the first thing he's looking for is, anyone guess? Empathy. Why? Because I have to sit next to you all day long. And if I'm a jerk or you're a jerk, it sucks, okay? So we have to develop our character to become better pair programmers. Okay, so assertiveness, flexibility, these sorts of things. Okay, cool. Boom, it works. It really does. Trust me if you haven't done it, okay? We complete each other. We really do. Okay, so why does test-driven development work? For these things. Okay. All right, I'll just jump to the end. Truth. Tell the truth. Okay, so why do these things work, right? So look at these worlds spinning out of nothingness. That is within your power.
Dude! Okay, so I want to tell y'all about a gem that I released this afternoon called Dude. And Dude came up in a pairing session that Carrie and I had where we hit an exception and we made fun of each other and we started making Big Lebowski references. And so I said, let's do something fun with it because Ruby should be fun.
And I said, you want a gem? I could do a gem. Nail polish.
So I asked Twitter, hey, someone make a gem called Lebowski that monkey patches error message frequently appending dude to your errors. But, like, I gave it a week and no one did it, so I did it my own damn self. It's not that hard. This is like 8 lines of code, and it's basically fuck with 2S, dude. But I had problems. So I was loading the code in IRB, like I would load the file itself, and that would work. And then I would load the gem, and I would just get comma dude. Fuck. I was like, what happened to that message? I had the... And so I wrote up a nice little description. See if you can spot the error. It's pretty easy. So I put up a nice little issue description. I CC'd Avdi because I'm like, that guy's smart about exceptions. Maybe he'll figure it out. Here's the pro tip. So what's next? Oh, go! Yeah, you're right. That's a good, valid point. So I want to be able to grow this gem so it just doesn't append do to everything, because that's kind of boring. And I think our error messages should be fun. So if you've got an idea of how you could override, say, a nil error so that it was funny, or throw in a few randomizations so it's not always the same error message, but it tells you what's wrong, then maybe you'll read your error messages and not like screw up. Fork it, make a pull request, use it in your repos. Thanks.
You guys look different from up here. Like the new pope, I know how he feels now. Is there a new pope yet? Anybody? No, I don't think so. All right, 5 minutes. Thank you. So this is sort of a work in progress. You don't need to plug in because there is no slides currently. This is my slide, and I have 4 minutes and 43 seconds, so I'm going to go as quick as I can. So don't be a poser is related to, do we have any designers in the house as well? Yeah? Do you, now keep your hand up if you are like a designer that lobs PSD files over the fence. Awesome. See, that, like, it's 2013. So why are so many web designers still think they're web designers if they're lobbing PSDs over the fence? Delivering static images starts with a false assumptions about the relative cost of potential solutions, fails to fully understand or clearly communicate the user experience that developers need to ultimately implement. So how many people have received a design and a spec or user stories that are out of alignment? Does that happen to anybody? Yeah, it happens quite often. And I kind of used to be that guy that was like, you know, a print designer that thought, hey, yeah, I like the internet and I use a lot of apps. I understand apps, so I can design for the web. And that's that's something that I guess we're sort of growing out of, but it is still around a lot. It's amazing to me how many consultancies have in-house still receive like PSD files and think that that's like, and they have to work with that and develop from that. So oftentimes, you know, I ran into functionality scoping issues and, you know, just like, oh, here's a cool button that's going to do this, and all of a sudden you just double the scope of the project. So those are things that working with developers and basically at some point, at 2 minutes and 47 seconds. Okay, here goes. At some point, out of the desire to better understand the medium and better communicate the design intention, I learned HTML, CSS, basic JavaScript to create a side project to learn these skills. And my eyes were like opened to the power of working in the medium during the design process. And then I had the fortune of designing for apps and creating working prototypes, which I then handed off to devs, and they were just like, wow, this is so cool. Like, I don't have to, you know, do this part of it, and it communicates so clearly what the intention of the design is and the functionality and, you know, the states of the design, which was huge. And again, my eyes were opened again. So I had the opportunity to, let's see, I mean, so at that point, there was still a ton of like refactoring that needed to be done with the code because it was, you know, like designer code, which how many grumbling devs are in here that are like, designers don't touch my code base, or, you know, stay out, like, right? Because, yeah, I see a couple of you guys like, what is it? Where's this guy going? This is lame. But I started pairing with devs on developing functionality. And what came of that, again, it was like this awesome eye-opening experience for both myself and the dev that, you know, today we basically, I had this experience, built out a new feature, and, you know, I dabbled in low-level programming stuff before, but I never really took it too seriously because I was a designer. And designers are just like, you know, devs were like, don't screw up my design. It's beautiful, it's amazing, and you're the guy that can jack it up. So it goes both ways, but this like mutual understanding happened. And out of that, like, I learned how to take and write an ERB file with some real basic logic. So, now I can like loop through and iterate, and, like that was really a cool thing. And after time and a lot of interest, I was like writing committable code, and in mostly views and some controller work, but contributing at a deeper level. 18 seconds. Anyways, today we have responsive grids, iterative design, all these things that no longer the old school methods no longer pertain. So I've got more. If anybody's interested, I'd love to like have a beer and talk about this. So I won't take any more time. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Shane. I'm speaking first tomorrow, so if you are not totally hungover, I'll see you then. I had some slides. So, who knows of Rubinius? Okay, so Rubinius is great. Now available for use on Heroku, thanks to some work by some Terrence Lee and some Andre Arco on Bundler. So in your gem file, you could specify which version of Ruby you want to use and which implementation. So I had some slides, but it's simple enough. I could just tell it to you, and you could type it into your text editor. So, on one line you say Ruby, and then a space and a quote, and you say a version number. So 187, 193, pretty simple. You could specify your version. Suspense. As another, I guess, argument there, here we go. There you go. That's how you specify that you want to use Rubinius version 2, the release candidate or whatever, and that you want to run it in 1.9 mode. So I think there's currently a 1.8 mode Rubinius bundler Heroku bug. But if you want to run your code in 1.9 mode on Heroku using Rubinius, that's all you got to do. And then when you push up to Heroku, it'll discover it, switch rubies. So you should do that. Thank you.
Sweet. All right. 5 minutes? Yeah. I figured since I'm at Ruby on Rails, I should, they said I should put this up as a talk because I was giving this advice last year to people going out to drinking. It's like, here's some cool tips when you go to a bar, like what you can do to have a better bar experience. So a little background about why this talk is up here. I'm a third-generation bar owner, almost. My family owns a set of bars in Chicago. I would technically be the third generation if it kind of survives. There's a divorce and all that crap going on right now, so who knows if that's going to last. But, I also didn't want to do the whole bar industry thing. I grew up in it. I know it. I kind of knew how to tap a keg when I was 10. It's a life skill, right? But, I didn't want to do that. I was into this whole programming thing, and they said, go get a real job. So I did. I went and got back into programming again. So I figured from that, all that experience that I know, I can impart some cool tips for you guys since we're going to go off drinking at 8 o'clock. So in my perfect world with a hot bartender, it's Tom Cruise before he went crazy. In a bar, when you walk in, you're going to see a setup very similar to this. A lot of bars are laid out this way. There's a whole lot of marketing going on. So specifically, those bottles that you can see are the call level drinks, as in like I'm calling out a label of something I want to drink. Therefore, it's usually more expensive. So if you're saying like, I want this particular kind of gin or whiskey, there's a lot of whiskey drinkers out here, I bet. If you say, I just want a gin or a whiskey, it's going to come from this section called the well. Much cheaper. It's whatever the house has. It could be the cheapest swill that probably tastes like motor oil or something like that. Be careful with that. So if you want something really nice, make sure you call it out by name. Are there Starbucks aficionados in the audience? I'll admit that I am one, but when you're at a bar, it's the same thing. There's a short or tall glass, depending on what size you want. Short can also be called a rocks or highball glass. Tall can also be called a Collins or pint glass. Some people call pint glass a double tall. It looks a bit like this. That's a rocks glass right there. Much smaller if you don't want to drink that much or if you want to try something out. This is my favorite, a upper martini glass. It's also my handle, Martini Soft. So looks like that. Most margaritas and cosmopolitans, stuff like that, all come like that. And then I'm sure there's a few whiskey drinkers that know this one. I want it neat, in a short glass, nothing touches it, no ice. I just want it in a small glass like that. That's also called a highball glass. Really, really small glass. But this is Ruby on Ale, so how about pouring beer? Do you guys know how to pour beer? Raise your hands, home brewers here. All right. So, well, let's review then, all right? So you start off with your clean glass. You did wash out the inside of it, right? So you don't kill the suds with any leftover soap. So you start off at a 45-degree angle, and you want to aim for the bottom third of the glass because you don't want to churn the beer. You're not trying to build the head yet. You just want to get the beer into it without pissing off the beer and creating that head. When it's about halfway full, start tilting it upright, okay? Once you do, this is when you're starting to build that beautiful head. This is where the flavor comes from. If you get a flat beer at a bar, try to send it back, but don't be an asshole. If you want, just drink a little bit of it. And a cool bartender trick is to take a straw and whisk the top really quick to just get a little bit of head up. You'll taste the beer much better that way, believe me. So once it's full, back away from the tap. You're done. Hopefully you got a head that looks just like that. It's about 2 fingers length. And that should be good to really enjoy that beer the proper way. But also, there's customer service involved. So please don't be an asshole, run to the back and critique the bartender back there while she's pouring your free beers. Okay? It's a two-way street. You want to be a good person, and in return, they'll be good to you as well. You might get free drinks out of it. Who knows? Even if you're not drinking for free at a conference. So being that better customer, start off by introducing yourself to the bartender. Get on a first-name basis and be very polite. Shake hands, say hi, whatever. That way, when the bar is packed tonight, with everyone here taking advantage of the free drinks, you can call them out by name and get some help right away. And also, don't forget to tip. Really, there's going to be a lot of us there. They're going to get a tip, but throwing in a little extra helps. Service industry tends to get really screwed by taxes, and it's not a very nice thing. But that's all I really had to say. Hopefully those tips work out for you. Thanks.
All right, my name is Jason Clark, and I'm a Ruby agent engineer at New Relic, and I am going to show you today how to write a profiler in 50 lines of Ruby. What is a profiler really quick? A profiler is an application or a library that lets you get some insight into what your code is doing. It takes a look at what's running in your application and gives you information about that. A lot of times we will take profiles by instrumenting all of the methods or wrapping all of those method calls to see how long they're taking. But that can be pretty heavy. You run something like Ruby Prof, it can easily double the amount of time your application takes to actually run. So we're going to take a different slant on this. We're going to take a sampling approach where instead of timing each of the method calls that we make, we will instead take a peek every once in a while to see what the state of all of our stacks are, and then use that information to try to give us a picture of what our application is doing. So let's imagine that this is our app, just sort of a basic web stack where we call all the way through our server, through to our controller, and down to our SQL, and we'll represent that by that thin strip. We go forward and we look at our application. So the blue arrows are points in time. Our application continues running and things happen during the gaps. But we take a peek at our app, and the first time we see that we're running some SQL. The next time we see that we're in our controller action. A little more time passes, we look again, we're down in our SQL, and the last time that we look, we're also down executing SQL. Well, what does this tell us? This tells us the frequency with which we're seeing different parts of our code being executed. And if you run this with enough samples over enough time, it will build up a picture of what's going on in your application. All right, enough talking about what these things are. Let's build it. The code that we need to execute for our profiler has to run next to our application code. So we're going to spin this off into a separate thread. That's going to keep executing and running behind the scenes. We have a loop that continues running, and it's going to sleep periodically. We don't want to consume all of the CPU while we're doing this. So we have some flagging as well to let us decide whether we should continue going. And then every so often, we're going to wake up and we're going to take a sample. That's the hard work and the heavy lifting. So what's it look like for us to actually take one of these samples? This is the most complicated code that we're going to see, but it's pretty simple once you break it down. The main thing here, so we get a list of the running threads that are in our process. We're going to iterate through that list that we get. Once we get that particular thread, then we can take a backtrace on it. Now that backtrace is going to have a series of lines. This backtrace is just like what you see like in an exception message when your stack traces show. And each of those lines represent a point that we're executing in our code. Looks something like this. Not the prettiest backtrace that you've ever seen, but it's an array of strings that we can break apart to get that information out. So once we've gotten each of those lines, then what we're going to do for this sample is we're just going to go through and do a really basic count. Just look at each of those lines and count up how many times we've seen it. You can do a lot more complicated things, but that'll get us done for a start. So that calls variable is going to be a hash, which we're going to key off of the line that we break out of that backtrace. The key, for purposes of displaying, we're actually going to break up with a regex. It will be represented as an array with the different parts, the file, the method, and the line number that we have. But you could represent this as an object in any way that would really make sense for you to key the information or display it differently. So with all that information, with that hash of the different locations and the counts of times that we've seen it, what can we get? We can build something up like this. Now, there's a lot of noise and there's a lot of different levels. You know, these stack traces get very deep. If you may have seen, like in a Rails app, if you blow that out to the full profile, you'll see hundreds of lines worth of code. But you can see down there at the bottom, some of our code is executing at the DIY profiler lib. That's actually the profiler watching itself running. And every time it executes, it notices that it's in the stack and sees itself running. This is just the tip of the iceberg. With the information from those backtraces, you can do things like building full call trees that represent the hierarchy of where things go. All the information that you need is built into that model that you can pick up just from getting the backtraces off of the running threads in a process. Code for this little sample that I made together is posted up on GitHub, and I'm also going to be giving a longer version of this talk at Mountain West RubyConf. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to try and do two things. I'm going to plug in my computer after this real quick. So I'm Mike Moore. I have a project called Minitest Rails that enables Minitest and Minitest spec within Rails. And I want to show a little bit of the problem that we have within active support test case. In Rails 3, active support test case inherits from test unit test case, which inherits from Minitest test case on 1.9. 1.8 is another problem. What we want is we really want this guy to inherit from Minitest spec, right? We can't do that because of the inheritance, and so I've done all sorts of terrible things to try and get that to work. In Rails 4, active support test case was going to inherit from Minitest spec until DHH found out about it and changed it to go down to Minitest test case, right? And therein is the problem, that there's a lot of features that people want in Minitest spec, but because of the inheritance chain, we can't get to it. So, with that said, now my computer will turn on. All right. Oh, wait, that was the wrong one. All right, is that all right? Can you guys see that? Okay, so this is a, huh? Why does that not work? All right, just pretend that it works. I want to show, okay, so we got a new version of Minitest that's going to come out. This is not quite out yet. If we do that, man, it's so hard to do when you can only do it one-handed. Ha, ha, ha. All right, so here's normal test. Anyways, what I want to show is this is coming. Minitest Rails is going to change quickly. What we're going to do is we're going to be able to extend any Minitest test case with the DSL, and we can use all of this within any Minitest test case. That means that we can use this within Rails without DHH blocking it. So that's all I wanted to show. And this is all from Ryan Davis's work today. And buy my t-shirts at rubythreads.com.
Close enough. Who can tell me what this means? That's right, and so we are nice. So I actually think this is one of the great tenets of the Ruby community, and it's all because of this guy, Matt, who released, I know, he's, you know, 20 years ago he released a Ruby, and I think for a long time, just the community was small and people were interacting with him enough so that when people would kind of break out and start being a jerk, folks would point back and say, Matt's is nice, and so we are nice. And I think the Ruby community has gotten a little bit of a bad name, and there's been some drama going on. And I think a lot of people are thinking that Ruby is not so awesome anymore. I disagree. I think it is awesome. I really like the community. I think that we can also take steps to keep it awesome and make it awesomer. And there's probably two ways of doing this. The main one I can think of is building a community. And it's a lot about small groups. I helped found a little meetup that meets outside of Washington, D.C. after a couple of us heard Dr. Nick talk about how we need to start more meetups. And that's been a fantastic success. We just have a bunch of great friends, and we help people get into Ruby and keep Ruby awesome for them. Then the other side of that is to write nice code, and not like the code is nice, but like nice interacting with other people. And I think there's a couple of good examples of how to do this. Obvious ones are giving back to open source, but I also think kind of at a lower level, something like semantic versioning is amazingly nice when you can run bundle update and all the things don't break because you just did a greater than for your version numbers. Let's bind things to where they need to be version-wise. Write git commit messages that aren't period or fix, because that's not nice. Use things like namespaces and sensible APIs. In the end, let's keep Minneswan alive, and if you are interested in one of these really awesome 8-bit Mats stickers, I have 5 left, so come and find me. So, yeah. Anyways, you have to come and find me sometime when I'm not standing on a podium. All right. Thank you very much.
Hello. So, you all know learning and teaching Ruby is easy. So, let me take up teaching Ruby to blind. You guys move with this. This Eric. Sorry about that. You guys know this is blind. He went to the highest peak Everest mountain. Now listen to me. So anyway, so there are social responsible from Rubyist. So we are into Ruby girls, girls bridge, and kids Ruby. So along with that side, so visually impaired people doesn't want to treat them differently. They want to be one of us, no sympathy. So to show video, I don't know. You can understand what the language is here. access method. Can you guys figure out which is the language? Yeah. Can you put that in the normal, so slow audio? This is how we normally understand the language. Slow speed, it will reduce the productivity. That's the normal speed. A lot of things we've taken for granted. So there are a lot of screen reading applications for Windows. We all blame on Windows, and all said and done, Windows is the better OS and better application for accessibility than other OSs that we need to accept it. And Ruby has less code, so it's very easy to teach blinds, and they can grab it well, and it's fun. The major problem while teaching them, we realized that the error message. Whenever there is an exception, it emits a lot of line. So it's very hard for them to understand. And commenting code, multiple line code. So anyway, it's going to read out the screen. So you need to figure out a better way and help them out. So we don't want to frustrate them out, the interest they have in Ruby, learning Ruby. Let's help them out. So who are interested in beautifying the error message or who are make the application, please consider there are blind people using this application. That's it.